campaign here in New Hampshire. I'm also a state representative from Londonderry and a former chairman of the New Hampshire Republican Party. I just came up some stairs, I'm a little bit out of breath. But anyway, thank you very much for being here on a rainy night. I met Governor Christie 8 years ago. And I've been doing this for a long time. I've been in politics now for 47 years. And there's probably 4 or 5 times I've really connected well with a candidate. When I met him that day, I really liked him, and I said, well, I've made commitments to other candidates to at least talk to them. Some friends were working for him, and I said, well, can't commit right away, but and so I went through the motions and met the other candidates and ended up deciding then, coming to believe then, and definitely have come to be totally convinced since that had Governor Christie been the person elected in 2016, this country and this world would be a lot better place. 8 years later, I'm more convinced than ever that that's the case. And I hope you'll all agree with me, and I hope we can all work together to make that happen this year, or this coming year in 2024. Nobody knows the issues better than Chris Christie. Nobody has studied them better. Nobody, in my opinion, has better ideas on how to address those issues here and around the world, and to make us stronger and better economically and internationally. And so with that, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Governor Chris Christie and Mary Pat Christie.
Thank you, Wayne. Hey. Appreciate it. Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Thanks for being here. It's good to be back. Hope everybody had a great Christmas. I will tell you, it's like the first 3 days in probably 8 months that I haven't thought about New Hampshire. And I went home, and all 4 of our children were home, and we had 25 other relatives to our home on Christmas Eve. And so we took just a little while to take a breath and celebrate the holiday and celebrate each other. And I hope that you all had the opportunity to do the same. But I told Mary Pat, time off is over. So she's here tonight. I want to introduce her. Mary Pat, thanks for being here tonight. You know, I got into this race back in June, and the biggest reason I got in was to tell the truth. And to tell it in a completely unfiltered and unabashed way. Because I think that more than anything else, what our country needs right now is the truth. Not someone's interpretation of it, not somebody's spin on it, but we need the truth. And you know, sometimes, as I'm sure each of you have experienced in your own life, it's not easy to tell the truth. Sometimes when you tell the truth, you're going to offend somebody. Sometimes you're going to make them angry. If you're in my business, sometimes you're going to get in the front of a room and tell the truth, and you're going to get booed. And no matter how long you're in this business, that's never easy, because you get in front of a room to try to persuade and convince and ultimately lead. And when you have to tell some really, really difficult truths, you're going to get some difficult reaction at times. But in the end, to me, that's what being president is all about right now in our country, because we all know how many problems we have. And those problems get worse because we're unwilling to address them, because we don't want to offend anybody. And these problems are big enough and tough enough, and we're going to talk about them tonight, that you can't any longer say what's pleasing to people. And so, whether, see a couple of my AARP friends here tonight, whether it's about entitlements, right? Or whether it's about war in Europe or war in the Middle East, or whether it's about abortion, or whether it's about the budget, whether it's about the southern border, no matter what these difficult issues are, you've got to tell the truth. And I'll make it easy for you. If someone asked me what the cause of the Civil War was, it's easy. It's slavery. And by the way, you don't have to take my word for that. When South Carolina passed its resolution to secede from the Union, the first reason they gave was the other states' resistance to allowing slavery to spread to the Western territories. So even if you're from the South, so you know these things, you should also know why your own home state seceded from the Union. And look, I think all of you, if you're objective about it, could look at the way I've conducted this race and say that I've been fair. I stood on the stage for the fourth debate, and Vivek Ramaswamy attacked Nikki Haley and said she didn't have the intellect of his 3-year-old son. And it wasn't the moderators who admonished him. It wasn't Ron DeSantis who admonished him. It wasn't even Nikki Haley that admonished him. I stood up and went after him because she's been my friend for 13 years. And one thing I can tell you about her is she's smart. And so for him to insult her intelligence, to me, that's not the way I was raised. And I knew my mother would be looking down from heaven and saying, Christopher, you were raised better. Stand up against somebody like that. So I've been really fair to Nikki, but let me say this, she's smart. And so don't get confused about what she's been saying and what she and her, new political husband, Chris Sununu, are trying to mop up all around New Hampshire, okay? She didn't say what she said last night and today about this because she's dumb. She's not. She's smart, and she knows better. And she didn't say it because she's a racist, because she's not. I know her well, and I don't believe Nikki has a racist bone in her body. But for purposes of this race, the reason she did it is just as bad, if not worse. And she get everybody concerned about her candidacy. She did it because she's unwilling to offend anyone by telling the truth. And so she isn't willing to say the same things about abortion in New Hampshire that she says in Iowa, because she doesn't want to offend people in Iowa who have a different feeling than people in New Hampshire. But then when she comes to New Hampshire, she doesn't want to offend them either. And she's unwilling to tell the truth about Donald Trump. She says he was the right president for the right time. She says that he should have been given a break after January 6th. She says that for some reason, chaos and drama follow him wherever he goes. This is like the arsonist saying, for some reason, burning buildings follow me wherever I go. Chaos and drama follow him because he creates it. And if you have any wonder about that, I urge all of you who are in this room and everyone who's watching tonight, go to his Christmas post on social media where he said for anyone who disagrees with him, they can rot in hell. And then he said, Merry Christmas. Now, this to me is someone who is unfit to be president of the United States. And I have said it over and over and over again. And today, Nikki got asked a question by 9-year-old Adam. Now, if you've been to any of my other town hall meetings, you know that Adam has come a few times, 2 or 3, I think 2 at least. First time he was complaining about infrastructure. No joke. 9 years old, he was talking to me about the highways and why there's so much traffic and why can't we build better highways and what am I going to do about infrastructure? He's 9. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, my Secretary of Transportation. 9-year-old Adam today asked her if she was a flip-flopper on Donald Trump and then asked her if she'd pardon him if she were president. So Nikki gave her typical answer on this on Donald Trump. She said, well, the anti-Trumpers think I don't say enough bad things about him, and the pro-Trumpers say I don't say enough good things about him, and so I guess I'm just right where I'm supposed to be. No, you're not where you're supposed to be, because she is smart, and she knows what he did on January 6th was wrong. She's smart, and she knows that what he did on election night 2020, when he told the American people the election was stolen and he had no evidence to prove it, was wrong. And the reason I know she knows it is because she said it back then. But she won't say it now. And, you know, Ron DeSantis, who I have some disagreements with as well, but at least Ron DeSantis has been willing to stand up and say, under no circumstances will I accept the vice presidential nomination from Donald Trump. And I've stood up and said, and I will say again tonight, under no circumstances will I accept any job from Donald Trump. But Nikki Haley won't say it. When she's asked that question, you know what she says? I don't play for second. Now look, none of us would allow our children to get away with an answer like that. Did you do your homework? I always do my homework. How'd you do on that test? You know I'm an excellent student. These answers are insulting from our children. Yet somehow, New Hampshire is going to accept this from a candidate for president of the United States? See, because if she is unwilling to stand up and say that slavery is what caused the Civil War, because she's afraid of offending constituents in some other part of the country, if she's afraid to say that Donald Trump is unfit because she's afraid of offending people who support Donald Trump, and because maybe she harbors in the back of her mind being vice president or being Secretary of State, and since she won't deny it, we have to believe that she's willing to do it. If she's unwilling to stand up to that, what's going to happen when she's got to stand up to Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries in Congress? What's going to happen when she has to stand up to Vladimir Putin and President Xi in China? What's going to happen when she has to stand up against forces in our own party who want to drag this country deeper and deeper into anger and division and exhaustion? If she's unwilling to stand up on this, on did slavery cause the Civil War? See, some parts of the media, they're missing the import of this. She's not a racist. It's worse in some respects. when you want to be president. It's worse to be able to be dishonest with people. And that's what's happening here. She's holding back. Holding back. One last thing on this topic. She said when she was running for governor in 2010, and she was asked this very same question about what caused the Civil War. She said, well, it was a battle between change and tradition. Change and tradition. I guess that tradition was enslaving Africans to work for nothing and to have no freedom. Tradition. I'm sure Nikki will see this, so I want to talk directly to her, okay? The Civil War was not a choice between change and tradition. It was a choice between right and wrong, and that's it, and we got to stand on the side of right. So we're going to keep telling the truth. And I, quite frankly, can't worry about who it offends because I'm supposed to be worrying about you. I want to be president of the United States because we got to get back to doing the big things to fix the problems in this country. And it's going to take somebody with broad shoulders and a willingness to take the heat. And New Hampshire, like I said on this news TV ad, it's up to you. It's up to you. Is this as good as we can do? Are the choices that are being laid in front of you as good as we can do? Doesn't this country deserve better? Doesn't the country deserve some strength? Doesn't the country deserve some honesty? Doesn't the country deserve to have someone who is willing to take on Donald Trump head on directly? Doesn't the country then deserve someone who's ready to move from that fight? Because you think that fight's bad, wait till you get to Joe Biden and the Democrats. Because if you think they're going to get their hands off of power without a brutal, ugly fight, you're mistaken. And so when Nikki said last night, oh, it was a Democrat plant in my town hall. Well, first of all, I say to everybody in New Hampshire, whoever wants to come in this room, come in this room. And whatever question you want to ask me, ask me. And if I can't deal with a question from a voter in New Hampshire, I have no damn business being in the Oval Office. I can guarantee you that. So we got big issues to talk about tonight, and I am now ready to talk about them. So here it's pretty easy. Here, unlike other town halls that you may have been to, my staff doesn't come around to you beforehand and ask you what question you might ask and then come to you and bring you the microphone. I will not say to any of you tonight, can you please give me an easy question? And we'll answer each one of your questions directly. And by the way, if you ask me a question and I don't know the answer, I will say I don't know. Because I also got taught at a very young age by my mother that I don't know is a strong answer. And say, I don't know, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you instead of just making it up. And you know, I'm a recovering lawyer, so I could make it up. So you just raise your hands. I'm going to call on you. We have folks here with microphones, right? Thank you. And we will pass those microphones around. Let's go to the gentleman all the way in the back. He's got his hand up right there, blue jacket, it looks like. Yes, sir.
Governor, thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you for coming.
David Conti from Hampton Falls. And I want to ask about Social Security. 8 years ago, you came and you spoke to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics and gave a policy speech. I think it was March of 2015. And you said if the top 4% of Americans said, we're not going to take Social Security, it would be solvent. That was a while ago, and the numbers have changed. But the fact is, there used to be 130 people paying into Social Security for every recipient. Now there's only 4.
Yep.
And in 10 years, there's going to be a 23% cut to benefits a lot of people in this room. So how are you thinking about fixing Social Security? Because there hasn't been a lot of political capital to try to do that.
Yeah, no, and the next president's going to have to spend his political capital on it, because you're right that it's going to go insolvent in 10 years, and it will be a 24% cut to Social Security benefits. So for any of you who collect Social Security right now, think about it. 10 years from now, the check you would get wired into your account would be 24% less. And for most people on Social Security who really rely on it, a 24% cut is going to lead them to have to choose between heating their home, paying their rent, buying food, getting their prescription drugs. There'll be nothing but ugly choices to make, and we can't have that happen. So we finally have to stop kicking the can down the road. And I would tell you, the most absolutely sickening part of Joe Biden's last State of the Union was when he stood up in front of the country in the chamber of Congress and said, can we all agree we're not going to touch Social Security? And both sides stood up and cheered. And I was sitting watching with Mary Pat, and I said, a whole room of liars and hypocrites. Because they know what he just said is absolutely true, that in 10 years, it's done. So the next president, if they were to have 8 years, is going to have to deal with it. Or it will then be in absolute crisis mode with ugly things. So how would I deal with it? First, I would raise the retirement age for people in their 30s and 40s. Okay, not for people in their 50s and 60s, because it's too late for them to be able to plan. But for people in their 30s and 40s, we got to raise the retirement age. We have a son who's 30 years old. If I tell him now the retirement age is going up 3 years or 4 years, and he's got 40 years to plan for it, and he doesn't, we got bigger problems with that 30-year-old son than Social Security, right? So, but doing that will really lengthen what we need to do here, because all of it's actuarially based on who's going to be receiving when and what the money's that's going to be needed. And so increasing that retirement age will help. And then secondly, I still believe what I said back in March of 15, that we have to have the wealthiest people in this country no longer get Social Security. We have to means test it. Now, it'll be a negotiation with Congress as to where that number hits, but it's got to be done. And look, I have people who have said to me in previous town hall meetings, well, I paid into it, I want my money back. I get it. But you know what? We pay for things every day in this country to the government that we don't get something directly back on. The analogy I use all the time with me and Mary Pat is that we've been fortunate in our lives. We've never been on food stamps. But we pay for food stamps, as do you, in your taxes every day. I'm glad I do. I don't want anybody in the richest country in the world going to bed hungry if we can avoid it. And we'll never get anything, I hope, out of the food stamp program. But we got to look at Social Security the same way, because remember why it was created in the first place. It was because after the Depression hit and companies went out of business, and all people did was rely upon their company pensions for retirement, and all those companies went broke, people were growing old in abject poverty and living on the streets. Social Security was set up to say, okay, this is a safety net to make sure that people will be able to feed themselves, house themselves, and not have to live in that kind of abject poverty. Look, Warren Buffett doesn't need Social Security. Mark Zuckerberg doesn't need Social Security. Elon Musk doesn't need Social Security. We could start there, but that's only a start. But if this country has provided you with the opportunity to accumulate really significant wealth that's enough for you to support yourself through your retirement, is it really that big a sacrifice to ask you to forego your Social Security check? My argument is no. And maybe we got to get back in this country to a mindset that John Kennedy talked about in 1961. Could you imagine any of the last couple of presidents in this country saying in their inaugural address, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country? We haven't had a leader like that since Ronald Reagan. And guess what? That's the last time Social Security was fixed. And there's no coincidence there. You talked about political capital. Ronald Reagan was willing to spend political capital on getting Social Security fixed, and he's willing to sit down with Tip O'Neill, the leader of the other side, and get it done. That's what I did for 8 years as governor of New Jersey. I had a Democratic legislature every day for 8 years. I didn't have an option to deal with anybody else. I either dealt with them or I did nothing. And so what I learned during those 8 years was compromise is not a dirty word. If what you do is move the ball down the field. And that's what we have to do on Social Security, because if we don't, we will have people like in the late 20s and early 30s, once again living in abject poverty after they worked their entire lives to avoid that. And as president, I will make sure that it gets done. And when it gets done, I will lose popularity. I'm telling you right now, my approval ratings will go down. I don't care. Because I want to be president to do big things like that. And if that means I can only do big things for 4 years, and everybody kicks me out after 4 years, I will smartly salute, and I'll go home. Because you would have already given me the greatest honor you can give to any American anywhere. And that is for a period of time to be president of the United States. And what I owe you in return is to tell you the truth and to take the chances you need to take to make the country extraordinary and special. And taking care of folks as they grow older is part of the compact we've made in this country, and we better keep that compact or we're not the country that we think we are, and I'm not gonna stand up for that. So that's what I'll do on Social Security. She'll bring a microphone over to you. Thank you, sir.
Governor, on that subject about how to get along, I think I was at Christmas myself with my nieces, and they're saying politics is awful, and no one can get along. And we do remember the days of Reagan meeting with Tip O'Neill and cutting a deal, and although Reagan only got 75% declared victory. And I know, being from New Jersey, there's a lot of Democrats. If you can expand upon how you get in this time when everything is so one side or the other, or you're awful, how do you bring it all back again, I guess?
I think there's two ways, substantively, the way you can do it. The first one is, I think one of the reasons people are so angry and divided is because government doesn't get anything done anymore. I mean, think about it, right? We elect Republicans to take over the House in 2022. And they've done nothing. Nothing. They've been in office a year. The biggest thing they've done is take, weeks, days to elect a speaker. Then they fired him. Then it took another 3 weeks to elect another speaker. And now they're taking a victory lap because they passed a couple of spending bills. And then they go home for Christmas. They don't deal with Ukraine. They don't deal with Israel. They don't deal with the border. They don't do any of that stuff. And the Democrats are just as bad on the other side. So the first thing I think you need to do to renew people's confidence is to start accomplishing things. And the way to do that is you've got to be willing to compromise. The problem has been the presidents that we've had since George W. Bush have been unwilling to compromise with the other side. And so as a result, they dig their heels in, the other side digs their heels in, and they think they're winning by continuing to yell and argue on cable news. And send out emails to all of us asking to donate money to them because they argue better than the other guys, right? So the first thing is you have to accomplish things. So you'd say to me, okay, Chris, great. How do you do that? It comes down to personal relationships. You cannot do this without developing relationships with people on the other side and your own party. When I was governor, one of the key moments of my 8 years happened during my transition to the governorship. The new Senate president was a guy named Steve Sweeney, who was president of the Iron Workers Union. So another shy and retiring guy like me, right? An iron worker, Democrat union leader as Senate president. So he was in the southern part of our state near Philly. I live in the northern part of our state up near New York City. And so I said to the troopers one day, I want to go to Senator Sweeney's office. It's about a 2-hour drive. And they said to me, you don't have an appointment, sir. It's not on your calendar. I'm like, he'll see me if I show up, I think. So let's just go. What should we call ahead and get some security? I go, look, if someone's waiting down at Sweeney's office on the off chance I might come down there and kill me, they earned it. They're just going to kill me. We're going to be fine, fellas. Don't worry about it. So I went down there. I showed up in his office. His secretary was completely flummoxed, and she was like, Governor-elect, I didn't see you on the appointment book. I said, well, I was just in the neighborhood, and I figured I'd stop by and say hello. And she said, well, let me see if he can see you. So she came out and said, he'll be right out. And then I realized why. He had just gotten back from the gym. So he was like in sweatpants and a t-shirt, and he was sweaty. And he's like, Governor-elect, I didn't know you were coming. I said, Steve, I was in the neighborhood. I just decided to stop by. He goes, Bull, your neighborhood's 2 hours away. What are you doing here? And I said, we need to talk. Can we go in your conference room? And he said, yeah. So we went into his conference room, and I looked at him. I said, look, we have a choice to make, and I want to make the choice now. I said, we can argue and yell and scream and fight with each other for 8 years. He said 4 years. I said 8 years. I turned out to be right. I said, or we can make a commitment to each other, and this is the commitment I'm willing to make to you today. I will always tell you the truth, and if I make a deal with you, I will stick by the deal whether it turns out to be politically advantageous to me or not. And then and only then can we put touchdowns in the end zone. That's what I want to do. I want to put touchdowns in the end zone. If you're willing to do it, I'm willing to shake your hand and make that deal with you today. And those 10 seconds that he was thinking were the most important 10 seconds of my governorship. And he stood up and he put that big, meaty ironworker's hand out and he said, deal. And we shook hands with each other and we got to know each other. Mary Pat and I went out with he and his wife, and we got to know his daughter, Lauren, who's a special needs child. And Lauren and I developed this great relationship. Got to know his son, Steve. Went to the Jersey Shore together. He and I would regularly go out for drinks together at some tucked away place where we could really talk. And over time, and if anybody went to Steve Sweeney now and asked him about what that relationship was like, it wasn't that we didn't have fights. I mean, I remember one morning I saw the front page on a Sunday morning of the biggest paper in our state, went to the bottom of my driveway to get it. I picked it up, looked at it, and the headline said, Sweeney, I want to punch Christie in the head, right? So that wasn't a high point in our relationship, but it started with him and then working with the other people to get to know them. I would call members of the legislature to my office in Trenton, the state capital, and I'd say, so tell me, what do you do for a living? Tell me why you ran in the first place. Tell me when you came here what you really wanted to accomplish. And if they told me something they wanted to accomplish that I felt like I could live with, I'd say, well, how about if I help you with that? How about we work together and let's get that done for you? Every year, every legislator on their birthday got called by me. And it got to be a joke after a while, right? Like, if I didn't call, and I would usually make those calls first thing in the morning because I had an hour and 20-minute drive to the state capitol from where we lived. But some mornings I'd be on other phone calls. And if I didn't call in the morning, they would start calling my office and saying, is he mad at me? Like, it's my birthday today and he hasn't called you. No, he'll get to you later. It became a thing. And all of those things led to moments where then you could call someone into your office when you needed a key vote, when you needed them to say something publicly that was supportive of a policy, or to keep quiet about something that was difficult that you were trying to do. You call them and you look them right in the eye and say, look, I helped you with this thing and that thing. I need you on this. Can you be there for me? Now, the answer wasn't yes all the time, but it was yes much more than it was no, because it's harder to hate up close. When you get up close with someone and you're not tweeting at them, you're not in front of 20,000 people saying awful things about them, but when you're sitting across the table from them, it's harder to hate up close. And I think that's the only way to do it, which means it's going to be hard and it's going to take lots of time. And I'm going to be, Mary Pat and I, like we did when I was governor, we had dinners with more people that not only we didn't agree with, but we didn't even really like. But guess what? They got elected too. And they have a role to play. And if you're president of the United States and you have the White House, the Oval Office, Camp David, Air Force One, Marine One, and you can't use that home field advantage just a little, you're bad at this, okay? You're either bad at it or you don't care. And I think, quite frankly, we've had presidents, Obama, Trump, Biden, who have been both. Some of them didn't care. Some of them couldn't pull it off. And, I know I can. And I know that the only way to be successful in this job and to bring the country back together is to show them some success. And the only way to show them some success is to get in there, roll your sleeves up, and work with people that you don't agree with. I can't imagine what my first meeting with Chuck Schumer is going to be like. He and I have known each other for a long, long time now, being just across the river from each other. But I'll tell you this, it'll be spirited, and I'll say what I think, and he'll say what he thinks, and I'm going to offer him the same kind of deal I offered Sweeney. If he's the majority leader, he wants to sit down and tell me what his priorities are, I'll tell him what mine are. Let's make up a list, and let's make an agreement about what we're going to try to do, and be honest with each other. If we can do that, I think we can get this country back on the right track. It's going to take some time, but I'm ready to get to work. And what they know and what Schumer knows about me, because he's watched me now up close, is I won't hesitate to tell him the truth. If I think he's being a jerk, I'll tell him. But I'm not going to announce it, from behind the podium in the East Room of the White House. It'll be in the Oval Office or up in the residence or on Air Force One when I'm flying him back home. Say, Chuck, you didn't keep your word on that. What are you and I going to do about it? And I think that that's the way you ultimately wind up doing it. And I think it's the only way to do it, because there's no silver bullet. It's just hard work and a willingness to listen to the other side. And I think there are not enough people in Washington, D.C. now who are even willing to do that. All right. Sir, right there. And I will turn around.
Governor, thank you for coming. I have watched every single one of your debates, and one of the things I like about you is definitely your honesty. And so I brought my little fact sheet to make sure that I was being honest.
Okay.
First of all, I was born in Cuba. We came over legally. We were in this country as permanent residents from day one. Every single one of my relatives became a citizen, including my grandmother at the age of 86. All right? We never took a cent from the government. We left Cuba because of what was happening. So this state speaks very well when you say live free or die. Okay? My issue is the chaos with the border. Right now, as of January 2021, 8 million migrants have crossed the border. Every day, over 10,000 migrants cross. That is bigger than the town of Epping or the town of Reagan where we live. They're coming over, they're crossing the border, they're not getting anything better. They're leaving one country for whatever reason, including hunger. But they're coming over here and they're being treated like cattle because there is no system. What will you do as President of the United States?
Your numbers are pretty close to the same numbers that I've read, and 200,000 illegal encounters a month, every month for the last 11 months are the most recent statistics I've seen. So we're right in the same ballpark. And that's why it's a huge problem, but it's not going to be fixed by like a short, pithy answer. You watched all the debates. You saw Ron DeSantis say he's going to shoot him stone cold dead as they come across the border. Or they're going to send the American military into Mexico. We're going to invade Mexico. As if we don't have enough problems. Now we're going to send the American military to invade Mexico. Look, those are what, and Trump has created this, okay? These are this TV tough guy talk. Sound as tough as you can. This is like Nikki Haley on Hamas. Finish them. Okay? How? Like, that's the next question. But, we don't get the next answer. I'm going to give you the 5 things I will do on the border. So it's going to take a minute or two, okay? But you hang in there with me. Number 1, day 1, I signed an executive order that sends the National Guard to the border. Our Customs and Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed. 200,000 encounters a month. They cannot do the job. They're overwhelmed. There's not enough of them. The National Guard was established to protect inside the nation as opposed to the Army, which is protected outside the country. So let's bring the National Guard to the border to supplement our Customs and Border Patrol officers to be able to stop all the people coming over the border. Number 2, hire 10,000 new Customs and Border Patrol officers. Now, it's going to take 12 to 15 months to get them recruited, trained, and deployed. So we got to keep the National Guard there for that long. But as the new officers come on board, you move the National Guard back out to their home posts. Third, we have 200,000 encounters a month. We have 38,000 detention beds at the border. So when we actually capture people, we have no place to put them. We have to double the number of beds to 80,000. And if we do that, then we can detain people appropriately and deal with the legal ramifications we have to deal with. Right now, because we don't have enough beds, you know what we do? We release them into the country, which leads to point 4. When they come over claiming political asylum, they're entitled to a hearing under U.S. law. You know how long it takes to get a hearing now? 4 years. 4 years to get a hearing. So what do? We release them into the country and say, hey, come back here to El Paso in 4 years for your hearing, which may result in you being kicked out of the country. Now, how many dummies are going to actually come back to the border when they think they might get kicked out, right? So they just live underground. And so what do we need to do? We need to triple the number of immigration judges. If we triple the number of immigration judges, we can bring the wait time for a hearing from 4 years to down below a year. And we can detain them for that period of time if we've doubled the beds. And then if they pass and they're entitled to come in, then they come in the way that you talked about. If they don't, we send them right back, but we're not releasing them into the country. And then having people say, okay, I'm going to round up all of those 8 million people and kick them out. I want you to think about what that operation looks like. Think about what that is going to take to find 8 million people who have gotten in here illegally. It's not like they're wearing a sign that says, I crossed the border illegally, So how we get, I've heard people say they're going to do this. I just want to know how. I was a prosecutor. For 7 years, I was the head of the 5th largest office in this country. If the Attorney General called me and said I had to do this, I'd be like, okay, you're the boss, but how? Am I going to go up to people based on how they look? Is that the way we want in this country, what we want to be doing? How are we going to do it? Triple the number of immigration judges. 5th, we got to change the immigration laws in this country because there's 2 reasons why people will want to come in illegally. One, if they're trying to do illegal things, deal drugs, do other illegal activities. Law enforcement has to deal with those folks. Or 2, because they don't think they can come here legally. And they're desperate, they're hungry. They're the objects of political persecution. They have family who are already here and they want to join them. Whatever it is, we need to give people a legal path to get into this country. And by the way, right now we have 6 million open jobs in this country. 6 million open jobs in this economy. And, this has happened to us before in our country. And when that happens, we set up a system to allow people to come in and fill those jobs so we can continue to grow our economy. And they pay taxes and they learn the language and they contribute to this society. That's when my grandfather got here. My great-grandfather came here in 1901 as a stonemason from Sicily. They were building New York City and they didn't have enough masons. And so he's getting ready to go and come over here. My great-grandmother was 9 months pregnant when they got their ticket to come. So he said, you stay here. I'll go to America first. And then after you have the baby, you come over. My great-grandmother, much smarter woman than that. She's like, you are not going to America by yourself and leaving me back here with the baby. I'm coming with you. And so what happened was she gave birth to my grandfather on the boat. And he used to, I know this story because he told me. And he said the proudest day of his life was a day that he doesn't even remember. He was 4 days old when they arrived at Ellis Island. And they made him an American citizen. And his grandson is running for president of the United States. His grandson. And that's what's great about this country. So we need to go to a merit-based immigration system where we look at where do we need help in these 6 million open jobs, and those people go to the front of the line. Let's get them in, let's get them working, let's get them paying taxes, and let's also tell them that you need to learn the language if you're going to come here. And secondly, We need to have E-Verify for all the employers so they know that they're actually hiring someone who is legal for two reasons. One, so they don't get themselves in trouble, or on the flip side, so they don't take advantage of people who are here legally and they have leverage over, because both things happen. Now, to do this, I want to be honest with you in response to his question, which is the Democrats are going to want something for that. They don't want merit-based immigration, and they don't want E-Verify. So we're going to have to give them something. I don't know whether it's on Dreamers or whether it's on Path to Citizenship for some of the people who are already here, but we're going to have to give them something. And we can't be afraid to enter that negotiation, because that's why we haven't had any type of improvement to our immigration laws for 40 years. Because everyone said, no, I'm not giving you this, I'm not giving you that, and then everybody walks away. We can't have that anymore, because we have the crisis we have at the border, and we have to fix that. And the long-term fix for it is give people a smart, understandable, legal way to come in here in a controlled way. And look, Reagan said it best. If you go and live in Germany, you can't be a German. If you go and live in France, you can't be French. If you go and live in Italy, you can't be Italian. But if you come and move here, you can become an American. There is no test except to be loyal to this country, to work hard and follow the laws to be here. And if we lose that, it, in my opinion, is one of the bases for our greatness. And everybody in this room, except for the Mayflower folks in this room, and I always got to be careful because in New Hampshire, you're going to find some Mayflower folks, right? Except for the Mayflower folks here, everybody has come into this country in that way. And we've got to make sure that we preserve that. So you had a follow-up. Go ahead. He said Blinken met with the president of Mexico to try to work out some kind of arrangement. Go ahead.
Make some kind of arrangement to deal with this border crisis. Well, the president of Mexico said, not until you negotiate with Cuba or Venezuela. Now, I was born in Cuba. The majority of Cubans, 92% of the Cubans, do not believe that this country should negotiate with dictatorship.
Look, I'd make it really easy, okay? I'd look at the president of Mexico and say to him, okay, I'm not negotiating with Cuba until Cuba grants freedom to its people. And if that's a basis of negotiation, then we're going to keep the National Guard at the border as long as I absolutely have to, and we'll keep sending all those people back to you until you want to make a deal with me. I'm not going to shoot them dead. I'm just going to send them back, and then they're your problem. So how do we want to do this? I mean, this can be done. Now, Anthony Blinken will not do it because many Democrats have the priority of having as many of these folks come into the country as they can because they're thinking they're going to vote for them at some point. So that's why they want them here, right? But if they think that they're going to get me to negotiate over Cuba and Venezuela, which are both communist dictatorships, and that somehow I'm going to normalize relations with them so that I can get a deal on the border in Mexico, not going to happen with me. But if he wants to talk about, I'll just let him say, look, this is between us. You want something that we're not giving you yet in return for you getting better on this? I'll listen. But I'm not, negotiating with Cuba, and I'm not negotiating with Venezuela. Maduro and the remnants of the Castro regime are not people that I'm going to be negotiating with until they treat their people with basic human freedoms. And until they do that, I can't deal with them.
Good for you.
Thank you. All right.
Hey, Chris. Hey. By the way, I saw you at a Springsteen concert, and you got some good moves. All right. So I'm Gary. This is Kathy. We're from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Drove all the way here to see you. And I've liked you from the very beginning. I want you to know we consider ourselves independents. I have voted Republican, and I have voted Democrat. And I really like everything that you stand for. I mean, you're a Republican governor in one of the most liberal states in the country. So, you do things right. But a couple of months ago, we had a mass shooting here in Lewiston, Maine. I was supposed to be in Lewiston the next day. I have really good friends whose children were supposed to be at that bowling alley that night. And my question for you, because I am so sick and tired of both Republicans and Democrats, as far back as I can think, never, ever getting anything done with gun control. This is New Hampshire. Live free or die. I'm not against guns. I have guns. My kids have guns. I love shooting. It has nothing to do with that. I want to know specifically where you stand on gun control and what you would do to at least try and change. I mean, does anybody really need a semi-automatic in this society?
Well, first I'll tell you what I would do, then I'll tell you what I won't do. What I am for are for things like universal background checks. And we should have universal background checks that can come back within 24 hours. So there's no reason why you can't do both searches of mental health records and of criminal records to determine whether someone should be able to buy a gun or not. And I think that's just common sense. And I also believe in what they have in Maine, but they didn't execute correctly, which are red flag laws, that when someone is identified by their family or their employer, which in the Maine shooting, it was done by both. Right? The United States Army telling people this guy's got a problem. He had been hospitalized once already for speaking violently and having some mental health issues. His family also alerted the local authorities that they were concerned about his propensity for violence and that he had weapons. The authorities dropped the ball. Now, that's the problem with any of these laws that we put into place. They have to be enforced the right way. If they're not enforced the right way, they're not going to be effective. But I'm for them. And I think they need to be enforced effectively. And I think the president needs to be saying that those type of things, background checks, red flag laws, should be enforced and should be enforced aggressively. Here's my concern about banning any class of weapon beyond what we've already banned. And we've banned a lot of weapons in this country. Fully automatic weapons are banned for personal use. And machine guns, those type of things have been banned over time. But I am concerned about, let's say, use Maine, since you used that as an example. In Maine, 2% of the gun violence in the state involves semi-automatic weapons. 98% of them involved handguns. So if you follow that logic down, then if you're really going to ban guns, what you should be banning are the handguns, because they're concealable much more than semi-automatic weapons usually are. And 98% of the violence has happened with those. I can't see us doing that. And so I don't want to give what will be some type of psychological victory and say, well, we're going to ban this, you should all feel better. And then the murders, the assaults, and all the other things that are happening with the 98% using the Maine numbers, and they're different in other states, but that's Maine, because I don't think it will do any good, and I think it degrades our constitutional rights. I don't think there are inferior constitutional rights. All constitutional rights have limits to them. Can't yell fire in a crowded theater, can't say certain things even though we have a right to free speech, but we should be very careful about what we do with those. And so for me, I think the bigger issue that we have to deal with that is much more attainable and can be much more effective is that we don't have enough mental health treatment in this country, and we don't make it mandatory in enough instances. So in New Jersey, when I was governor, I made it easier to involuntarily commit people for a period of time. Now look, that's a dicey issue, but we got to try to find some balance here. And when people have shown serious mental health troubles, we need to get them help, whether they want the help or not, because their serious mental health issues are not just about them, as we learned in Maine. They're about everybody else that they're exposed to. And so I would urge that to be done nationally, make it easier to involuntarily commit people, because when they go in there and they get that care, one, it gets them off the street for a period of time, but two, there's a possibility we can help them. And I think we need to do that not only for our public safety, but also for humanity. And we want to try to help people with that. And we don't have enough of that available to people. I'll divert just for a second because I talked about mental health to say too, it's one of the things that I would be willing to forgive student debt for. There are certain areas of this country where we have a real need for people in certain areas of healthcare, mental health, drug treatment, and general practitioners, right? To be able to take care of day-to-day keeping people healthy, as opposed to waiting until they go to the hospital or the emergency room to take care of them. If people were willing to go into those fields and commit to doing at least 10 years after they graduate, providing that kind of care, I'd be willing to forgive student loans for those people, to be able to do that. But I'm not forgiving student loans for everybody, because that's not right. But if they're helping for the greater good in this country, and when you look at the number of gun deaths that we have, when you look at the other deaths that we have due to mental health, like suicide, sometimes by gun, but sometimes other ways, and you look at 110,000 overdose deaths last year, now being the leading killer among men 18 to 34 in this country. We need to get people into those areas. So I just divert for a second, but I get back to your question. That's the way I would go about it. More available and aggressive mental health treatment. I would be for universal background checks. I would be for red flag laws that need to be enforced. And lastly, our Department of Justice needs to focus on getting illegal guns off the streets. Well, what I learned when I was a prosecutor was that the criminals didn't care about what the laws were. They were going to go and get guns no matter what. And we have about 350 million guns and handguns in circulation in this country right now. So we've got to enforce the laws against people who obtain those illegally. And we got to put them in jail. And we have to give them mandatory minimums for those gun crimes. And we did it. I'll tell you one quick story. When I was U.S. Attorney, we ran a task force with local police in Camden, New Jersey, which at the time was the most dangerous city in America, the highest murder rate per capita of any city in the country. And we ran this program where we had federal agents working with local police to get guns off the street. We arrested one guy one night. It was a Camden City police car that pulled up on him, but it had a federal agent in there along with a Camden City police guy. So this guy had been arrested many times and he knew the drill, right? So he got in the back of the car and they're driving through Camden and they drive past Camden's police department. And the guy says, whoa, 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 whoa. You're supposed to stop there. That's where I get booked. This was a real pro. You're like, that's where I get booked, is there. And they go, oh, no. This is a federal task force. You're going federal. You go to the federal courthouse. According to the cops who told me the story afterwards, he broke down in tears in the back of the car and said, I cannot do federal time. Tell me what I need to do to get out of this. The federal government has authority in these areas because there's no parole. Right, so this guy knew two things. One, I'm not going to the jail down the street so my friends and my family can come visit me. I'm being sent to Nebraska. And I got to serve 85% of my term with no chance of parole, which is different than what happens in the States. If we start enforcing the gun laws federally in a really aggressive way against criminals, we're going to get a lot of those illegal guns off the street that wind up sometimes in the hands of mentally ill people who wind up doing real human damage with it. So that's the way I would approach it. I'll end it by saying this. It's not a perfect answer. And I wish I had the perfect answer, but I don't. And I think it's the best we can do while also respecting the constitutional rights that people in this country have to be able to have arms in their homes like you do and others. And I think that's the balance we have to strike. And I think if we do that, we'll improve it. We'll make it better than it is now, but we're never going to make it perfect because the violence that occurs both here and as we see all around the world, in some instances is just unavoidable. But I would do the best I can to try to avoid it by using those tools.
Thank you for your honesty.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. I was just wondering if you would address the issue with the Maine primary, that you didn't qualify. Yeah.
Well, we're still fighting that. The folks who collected 6,000 signatures for us, there's a rule in Maine about having to segregate them by town. And apparently when they submitted them, they didn't segregate them by town. We had 3 times the number of signatures we needed, but they didn't segregate them by town. And so as a result, the Secretary of State said, well, they're not segregated by town. Even though you have 3 times the number of signatures you need, we're not going to put you on the ballot. I think that's a little form over substance thing. I'm not happy that they weren't segregated by town, and I've had discussions with the people who did that, and as you might imagine, they were not pleasant. But we're in court now fighting it, and I think we'll be on the ballot in Maine. Okay, but that's what happened. All right. The young lady in the pink in the back.
Okay. So, look, I don't need a microphone.
Everybody's young to me now, I'm telling you. Go ahead.
Hello. So, remember me, Governor Goomba? 7 years ago for you guys. I was in a town hall just like this. I grabbed the microphone and said, "Hey, fellow Goomba, we're both Italian. When are you going to take the gloves off and start smacking Donald Trump around?" Got a big laugh. It was on the front page of the Boston Globe the next day. It went viral. Did you know we went viral? You
Yes,
and
I did.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it was. They were reading.
I was informed, yes.
Yeah, they were reading about us in Pakistan, Haiti, and Egypt. It was very cool.
My wife was very jealous.
But anyway, so, you should have taken my advice 7 years
You're right.
ago, Governor, right?
You were right.
We wouldn't be in this big mess. Have you thought about me over the years, by the way?
No,
Anyway,
no.
you should have taken my advice.
You're
But
right about
whatever.
that. Absolutely,
And
I should have.
While we're at it, my picking a bone with you.
Okay.
You jumped into bed with Donald
I
Trump,
did.
the evil bastard.
I did.
But I'm going to forgive you for that.
Thank you.
So now, today, 2023, I just have to say, woo! You are taking the gloves off, baby, and I'm so proud of you. You are doing a fantastic job. Woo! Woo! And the history.
Is there a question here?
Books, in the history books, it will be written that you're the only man, presidential candidate with stones this time who was able to do that. Nobody else. So no matter what happens, please, God, don't let Donald Trump be president again. You will be in the history books for what you have done, and my hat is off to you, sir. You're wonderful, and I'm a lifelong Democrat. I think you'd make a great president.
Thank you. Well, two things strike me after that. One is, why haven't I been thinking about you? And second is, just for a brief moment, when you were about 2/3 of the way through that, I thought I had been transported back to New Jersey. I really did. So that's the kind of thing that used to happen in my town halls in New Jersey. But I thank you for that, and I love you back. And I appreciate your comments and your support very much. All right, let's go to this gentleman right here in the plaid.
You said that semi-automatic guns, that you can't get them converted to automatic guns? Because you can buy it for like $30, $40 in Manchester on Brown Ave, and you can buy silencers now. That's the next mass shooting. You can legally buy a silencer, and they're going to be on a tall building, and you're going to see at a concert a whole bunch of people falling down and won't know why. When did that get? When was that changed from against the law to the law?
Well, look, there's lots of things that the law has to catch up with, that when you ban certain things and you ban certain weapons, this is the thing that happens when you start going down the road of banning certain things. Because then, enterprising capitalists will then figure out how to get around the law, and bump stocks, which turn things from semi-automatic to automatic, are one of the things that happen. I have no use for bump stocks, and I don't think that they should be there. But it points out the problem, is once you think you could solve this problem by banning things, Americans have great ingenuity, and they find their way around it if they think there's a way for them to make money to do it. So the law is always going to be catching up, and always has been catching up, not just in this area, but in every area, to American ingenuity and people who want to make a buck. So, that's why I'm concerned, and I'm glad you asked what you asked, because we can go through each one of those things. I can tell you what I think, and I will, but it's not going to fix the problem. We have to get to the root cause of this problem, which is that the gun didn't shoot itself. And that poor disturbed guy in Maine, he picked up that gun and he decided that night, for whatever was going through his head, that he was going to go to a bowling alley and just start killing people. And I wonder if we had banned semi-automatic weapons, whether he would have just not gone in there with multiple handguns and started killing people. I don't know the answer to that question, but what I know is if we don't get to the root cause of the problem, we can ban every type of gun and they'll keep working for ways around it, and smart people will do it and criminals will do it, because if we ban it and they can get it, they'll take it anyway.
When they change silences, they will.
Well, I don't know. See, I have to plead guilty to the fact that I am not familiar with the gun laws in New Hampshire. Go to Sununu's next town hall with Nikki and ask him, and make him answer the question. Because he'll know the answer. I don't. I could tell you in New Jersey what the laws are, but I couldn't tell you why the laws are the way they are in New Hampshire. But ask Sununu. And I'm not saying I'm for or against whatever he's doing, but he's the guy who's got to answer that question. Yes, sir.
Thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
And I have a comment before my question. I was featured in 2 of your commercials that ran on local TV, and I've heard from people that I haven't heard from for a long time. So if that's any indication of how far it went, it went pretty far.
Good. Good. I'm glad to hear that.
So my question is about caregiving. We have a lot of people in here, and I'm sure a lot of people have cared for their parents or are going to be caring for their parents or are going to need care themselves. Most of this is on a voluntary basis. It's $400 billion in the United States of voluntary caregiving. And I caregived for my father, my parents for 15 years. My wife caregived for her parents for a number of years. And it's a burden on our lives. And my parents did not live close to us. There was like a lot of travel involved, and I couldn't be there instantly when they needed it. And keeping their home was quite a task. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the role of the federal government in helping with caregiving.
Sure. And I had this question from a gentleman, it was probably 2 months ago or so now, at a town hall meeting up here, who's talking about it in terms of his wife, who had gotten ill and needed care. She had some form of dementia. He wasn't specific about what kind, but she was in her 50s. Yeah, right. This was a few months ago, and so I talked about this then. I'll repeat what I said then. First off, I've watched this happen. My dad, my mom died 20 years ago. My dad got remarried a number of years later, and his second wife had Alzheimer's, and he was at 85 years old her sole caregiver. And we saw what it was doing to him, because she wouldn't permit help in the house, and he had to do it himself, and it was killing him. And so I know exactly what you're talking about in terms of the impact that it has on not just the people who are ill and need the care, but the people in the family who are providing the care. It is not only physically often debilitating, but it is psychologically debilitating, because early on in the situation with my stepmother, she didn't even recognize him anymore. And so, the care he was giving wasn't even being acknowledged by her, by even knowing who he was. And so this is a really, really big problem. And as our society gets older, in response to the gentleman's question back there about how many people will be on Social Security and how long we're living now. Remember, when Social Security started, people's life expectancy was in the early to mid 60s. We're now in the early to mid 80s, and it makes a huge difference. That's the average. So, look, what I think we need to do is acknowledge that institutional care isn't right for everyone. And there's a lot of people who don't want their loved ones in a nursing home setting, and they're willing to have them at home if they can have some help to be able to go out and do the food shopping, go out and take a mental health break every once in a while, and be able to, gear themselves up mentally and physically to be able to continue to provide the care to someone that they love, whether it's a parent or a spouse. And so I think what we have to do is change the way Medicare works to be able to make it much easier for people to get the home health care that they need, rather than force people towards an institutional option. For some people, it's necessary, right? They get so sick that you can't care for them at home anymore, and that's a difficult decision that people have to make. But sometimes it's just necessary. So we need to continue to have the institutional option available for the people who are really ill and can't be cared for safely in a home setting anymore. But we need to adjust Medicare so that it gives people the option, if it's medically feasible, to be able to keep people at home and for them to be able to have a break from it. I saw it with my dad, and fortunately for us, he's 90 years old now and doing well, and so we made our way through that stage of his life. But I know that's happening to people all over this country every day, and we need to be able to give them options that maintain a quality of life for them, while also allowing them to do in their heart what they want to do, which is care for the person they love, whether it's a parent or whether it's a spouse. So that's the way I would go about it, would be adjustments to Medicare to make the home option more viable, more available. But I don't want to do it at the cost of getting rid of institutional care, because for some folks, that's the only option that can work, given other health problems that they might have, in addition to Alzheimer's or dementia or whatever is causing the mental problems. So that's the way I would handle it. All right. Let me go. Let's see. Yes, I want to get some women here. Too many men have been asking this question.
Awesome. Hi, my name is Camden. I'm a high schooler from Maine. So you've said that you believe that marriage is between a man and a woman, yet many young Americans from my generation believe strongly in support of gay marriage. And I was wondering if, as president, your viewpoint on that would change, knowing that many young Americans do not believe in the same thing that you believe in.
Yeah, it already has changed. I mean, look, I think this is generational. I think you put your finger on it, right? When I was governor and I was taking that position, I took a lot of heat from my kids, because my kids were older at the time, and they were giving me a hard time about it. And I told them, I'm governor, you're not. So I get to take the positions I want to take, and I don't regret doing that. But what I know is that society has changed, and what people are accepting in our country now is different than when I was growing up, certainly than when I was your age. And I don't have any objection to it any longer. In the end, I think I've been convinced. And, that's part of being a thinking, breathing human being, I hope, is that you can hold certain opinions at one time and hold them genuinely, and I did. And I felt there were other ways to be able to deal with same-sex relationships other than just marriage, and that was the argument I made at the time, was that we can accommodate this in other ways. But you know what? I was wrong. And so, for me, it was a process I had to go through to change the way I've been raised, both from a family perspective and what my mother and father taught me and felt, and also from a religious perspective and what I'm a Catholic and what my church taught me to believe. But over time, look, this past week or two, Pope Francis is now allowing, blessings of same-sex couples. Even the church is changing. And so, I think this is part of just being honest with people. You can hold certain beliefs firmly, but then as you watch more and more evidence come in, and you meet more and more people, and you listen to them and get to know them, your opinion can change, and mine has changed over time on this. And so I don't look back and have regret, because I know that I didn't do what I did out of any sense of prejudice or bias. It was just what I believed could be done and should be done. And even back then, I used to say, look, my argument with the legislature was that we shouldn't decide this, put it on the ballot, let people decide, and if they vote to have same-sex marriage, then I'll enforce the law like I'll enforce every other law. But you're absolutely correct that my personal opinion, you stated correctly. I thought that marriage should just be between a man and a woman. That's the way I was taught, that's the way I was brought up, and that's what I believed, but your generation has changed my mind. So, and I'm sure that there were lots of things that, my parents tried to push on me that I didn't like. I can't remember it at the moment, but I'm sure there were, and because my dad's watching too, so I don't want to make this a tough night for him. And we changed their minds on certain things, right? So I think that's part of the role of the next generation, is to craft the world in the way they think is the best for them and for people of their age. And so you helped to make me better. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the question.
Hi, thank you for evolving, for coming to our town, for taking the gloves off. I had a question about Reagan, which you started with. Why do you paint him as some hero of Social Security when 40 years ago, when he found that the trickle-down effect didn't work, he enacted the payroll tax hike of 1983 and did create a 2.7 trillion surplus for Social Security, which he then funneled into the general fund. So, in fact, he has escalated the demise of our Social Security fund.
Well, you could argue that a couple of different ways. First of all, the payroll tax hike was part of his compromise. Reagan didn't want the payroll tax hike. Tip O'Neill did. And Reagan ultimately wound up compromising in that way to get other things that he wanted to get in terms of retirement age and eligibility. And he is as guilty as every other president and member of Congress in terms of taking money out of the trust fund and spending it elsewhere. So when I said Reagan did the right thing, he did the right thing by agreeing to those things and changing things that helped to lengthen it. Now, he went ahead and let them steal some of the money, and Congress stole the money. Okay, so anybody who's in this job is not an unabashed 100% hero. I don't think we've had a president who's been 100% unabashed hero on any one issue. But I will tell you that I think Reagan set a tone in this country, and through his policies showed people that government could work and get things done. Not perfectly, but let me tell you, I'd trade for Ronald Reagan right now in about 15 seconds over what we've had in the last few presidents. And I'd also say to you that he and any of these other folks who are not perfect and who won't be perfect, doesn't mean they didn't do some things that they did well. So if I gave the wrong impression to everybody, I thought what Reagan did was absolutely perfect, I don't. And I think that every member of Congress and every president who participated in draining money out of the trust fund were just kicking the can down the road. But what I will say is, he put the money in there for it to be stolen. And no one did that. And then when they stole it, he deserves blame, his share of the blame for that. But he also deserves his share of the credit for actually putting together a system that avoided the 20+% cut we talked about back there. And it's part of the problem that we've had all along with people not being willing to fully address something. He partially addressed it. He made it somewhat better. He could have made it even better if he would have kept the trust fund money in the trust fund and not used it for general fund. So on that, I think even Reagan himself, if he came down here, would plead guilty to have agreeing to that. I don't think it was his idea, but he certainly agreed to it, and he signed the budgets that did it, so he has accountability for it. The last thing I'll tell you goes more to his question about what Reagan was able to do in terms of bringing the country together. While not perfect, I don't think we'll ever see his likes again. He won 49 states for re-election. 49 states. They didn't talk about red and blue states back then, right? They didn't talk about certain states always being red, always being blue. Ronald Reagan won 49 of them. And I think that speaks to what he was able to do as a leader, not in being perfect, but in bringing the country to feel like things could be accomplished together if we work together. And the people who voted in 1984, I was one of them, who voted for him, believed that this was someone who was a real leader, who was willing to make decisions. I didn't always agree with Reagan. Some of the stuff he did on student loans and other things I didn't agree with either. But in the end, I think he was pretty good. And I'm biased, okay? I'll end this way. I spent the last year before I got into this race working on a book on Reagan that's going to come out in 2024. And so I spent a lot of time studying and researching it and then writing the book. And so I will have to admit to you up front, I have some bias and some recency bias given what I've been working on for the last year. So I'm a fan, but if I gave you the impression I thought either that solution or anything else he did was perfect, it wasn't. But it was much better than what we've been getting, in my opinion, from Obama and Trump and Biden. All right. Yes, ma'am. The mic there. So I don't have to reach over 2 rows of people. Miss? Oh, sorry.
Always
Okay.
miss.
Yes, miss.
All right, thank you. So, thank you for the question about the evolution, because that was my first question. You have talked about Reagan a lot. That was my first vote as well. My dad picked me up at Dunkin' Donuts, and I cast my first vote. I would love to know, as he was a leader, and time, as you have alluded to, shifts, and it changes, and our kids are different beings from what we are. How do you see yourself shifting and leading the Republican Party as a person who is really not understand, as Reagan said, I did not leave the Democratic Party, it left me. I'm feeling that way about the Republican Party.
Yep.
But my other question was about the student loan when you mentioned certain people having forgiveness. I've been in community action for almost 18 years, and I think that it is a really important, I think it's an important issue. I would love to know what you think about community action and CSBG in particular.
Sure. Okay, so I'll start with the first part. I mean, look, if I didn't think the Republican Party needed to change its focus, I wouldn't be in the race. I mean, the easiest thing for me to do would be just to sit by, and I've had a really good career, and just not do this. But I became so convinced that Donald Trump had taken this party, and others, but under his leadership, had taken this party in a direction that I think has been divisive for the country, and not contributing to making us better. And so I'm willing to have this fight because I absolutely believe what you believe, which I think is what you believe, which is that the party has moved in directions that no longer represent, I think, the values that originally made us Republicans when we voted for Reagan in 1980 when I voted for him the first time. Mine was in my dorm room at the University of Delaware on an absentee ballot. But so I think that for me, this fight is for the soul not only of our party, but of my country. I think we can do so much better than this. And more than any particular policy, we can't point to the White House anymore, and at least I can't, and tell my children, be like him. I mean, we used to be able to do that, and we can't anymore. I don't want my children posting things on social media telling people to rot in hell. I don't want people going, his Thanksgiving message, Trump's, was to give a list of all the people he was thankful for that he hated at 2:03 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning. Now, this is someone who, one, has nothing but hate in his heart, and two, is deranged. What the hell are you doing up at 2:03 a.m. on Thanksgiving morning giving a list of people you hate? So, I mean, the turkey hadn't even gotten down yet. It was 2 or 3 in the morning before he had dinner. He didn't even have time. He didn't have the turkey indigestion, excuse. Look, so that's why I'm in it. And I think that I'm in it to try to bring our party back to a place where we understand that we are temporary stewards of this country's tradition and history. And that we need to acknowledge our temporary but important role in that. And all the people who came before us and the things they fought for and the things they died for and the things they stood for, we have to respect. And I think that respect has gone out the window. And I think that's why voters are as angry as they are and divided as they are, because they look at this and say, why should I be supportive of this? And so ultimately it's about leadership and being willing to stand up and say things that are, at least at the moment in some quarters of our party, unpopular. I mean, I went down and spoke at the Republican Party of Florida convention. You can only imagine the reception I got there, right? I was introduced, I hadn't said a word yet. I was introduced on the stage and they were booing me like crazy just because I was there and because they know what I stand for. I took that as a moment of triumph because there was not a doubt in any of those people's minds what I was for and what I was against. And I think we got to get back to that kind of leadership where it's not about me. It's not about me. It's about you. And we have, had a president in Donald Trump who cares more about himself than he cares about the people who elected him. And that's not what our party used to be. And I think that we need to get back to that. Now, on the student loan stuff and community action, look, I've spent a lot of my life, everyone has their own passions, right? In terms of how you want to try to make your community better, what you want to do. Before I got into elected office, the thing that I spent my most time on was on treatment of drug addiction. And I think there's enormous value in that, and I think that we don't have nearly enough of it. And from my perspective, we need to have a national conversation about the things where we have a need for help. And then we need to use the tools of government that we have to try to fund those things in very different ways, sometimes with loan forgiveness, sometimes with tax credits, sometimes with direct subsidies, but in ways where we can build a national consensus on those things. And I think that's part of what a president's job is to do, is to say, these are what I believe, let's hear from everybody else, and let's see if we can form a national consensus on the things that are most urgent right now. Because we can't do everything all the time, but let's see what our most urgent problems are. I introduced some of those things that I think are our most urgent problems in the health area. And I think we need to address those. And I think that we were about to start addressing those when COVID came, and then everybody got distracted, rightfully, by what was going on with COVID. And we lost our way on drug treatment and on mental health treatment. And we're now living the aftermath of that. So I'm open to discussing and trying to lead a national conversation on what things we should be using those tools of government for and in what order. I'd give you my opinions off the top and what I think are the most important, but then members of Congress and the public need to weigh in on that. And then what my job would be to do as president is to say, okay, here's the national consensus. This is what I'm hearing. Get 218 votes in the House, get 51 votes in the Senate, and let's get moving. And if I have to compromise a little bit with them on certain things, which I'll have to, fine. But let's get something done, because in communities all over our country, I'm sure you're seeing this. I've seen it. There's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering going on because we're not dealing with some of these core issues. And we have people in this country who are willing to do it. They just need the help to be able to get it done. And that's always been the greatest strength of this country anyway. So why are we not utilizing that incredible resource? And so that's the way I would approach it. And hopefully it would lead to a consensus. If it did, then I think we could really get some things done that would make a big difference in the lives of people every day. So thank you for your question. All right. Yes, ma'am, right back there.
Hi, thank you. I've come to a few of these now, and I've heard what you've had to say. I think one of the biggest things that I've recognized by what you've said over the years and what you're saying now is the maturity that you've come, and you've even used that word yourself, to describe your understanding of how to handle certain situations, how you would reflect upon them, even as much as the situation that the young lady brought up over there. Like that's called wisdom. Second of all, to have somebody that's able to answer questions, bringing up factual information on various topics, that's called intellect. I don't know if we've had a president that's able to do that so quickly and accurately. So thank you for having the wisdom to do that as well. And God love you for being humorous. You too make people laugh. But here's my question. You've learned things over time. You've been a party to things, good, bad, or indifferent, where you were present and heard how the thought process is used to target certain populations. In this country right now, Our justice system is overwhelmed with the amount of insurgencies we have from these small groups. They've been driven by various media comments and by people on purpose inciting their actions. If you've been present to some of the information of the person who is responsible for those things, are you able to reverse engineer it in some way and use that knowledge on how he was able to titillate those individuals to cause certain actions, to maybe come up with policy or come up with plans on how to fix some of those problems?
Yeah, because I think the answer is yes. And the reason the answer is yes is because it wasn't policies for the most part that moved those people. It was a personality. And he used his, we're talking about Trump, so we're clear on this. Not a pronoun guy. Trump used his ability to charm and cajole and anger for purposes that were not in the best interest of the country. And I think in the very same way, the reverse engineering of that is to remember who you're working for every day and to reverse using those skills. Now, everybody has different levels of those skills. I think mine are pretty good. And my job would be to use those skills in that way to convince people. And I've said this in these town halls before. I don't know how you can say you love this country and not love Americans, have hateful things to say about Americans. I mean, I think that the president has to open his heart to every American. And I think it starts there. I think you can tell whether someone's opened their heart to you or not. There's not some test. It's what we learn in growing up and becoming people with some wisdom over time about whether someone's genuine or they're not. We're not always right. We can all be fooled. I think a lot of people were fooled by him in 2016. I'm one of them. But in the end, wisdom only comes, I think, through pain. You don't get wise by winning. You get wise by losing and by being challenged, because that's, in my experience at least, when you become truly introspective and really examine what you can do, what your motives are, and how you can change something that's causing pain. And look, I think I've been in the middle of this for a long time in this process. And I think I've learned that in the end, what we need as a country are two essential things before anything else: truth and love. And if we don't have those two things, the problems are impossible to solve. But both of them are hard. It's hard to tell the truth sometimes, as we learned about the Civil War. And it's hard to love people who you disagree with, vehemently disagree with. It's hard. But if we don't, we're lost. We're lost. And so you want to know, how would I reverse engineer it? That's the way I would. Because I think the exact opposite of him is truth and love. Because he's about lies and hate. And that's the way I would reverse engineer it and start right there. The policies hopefully flow from that. And it's based philosophically on what you believe and what you think the role of government is. And we'll have an argument about that. That's what this country was originally designed and set up to do, was to create those arguments. Checks and balances, different branches of government, all having different powers, so that everybody would have an opportunity to have their say. I'm okay with that part of it. The part that I'm really not okay with is the lying and the hate. And that, I think, more than anything else, is what's causing us not to accomplish things. And that, not accomplishing things, combined with the lies and the hate, is what's creating the anger and the division. And I think that's the way you reverse engineer it.
This one's really quick. Based upon what you've said with the love and the other thing, there's a children's book. It's called The Paper Dragon. And it goes along with everything you just said.
I have to read it. I haven't read that one yet. All right. Yes, ma'am, right there. I'll give you mine.
Hi, Chris, Kathleen. I've been to a couple of your town halls. I really agree and love everything you have to say. I think it's what a lot of the country is looking for. like the gentleman over here, I've been an independent my entire life. I voted Democrat, I voted Republican. So my question is relatively simple. In the essence of it takes a village, I mean, I've been reading the room here. I'm seeing a lot of claps, a lot of head nodding. What can we do to help you be the Republican nominee other than showing up at the ballot box on January 23rd?
Well, let's start with that, okay? Don't mess that one up, all right? All right. So we'll start with that. Look, this is all that's left to do now, okay? Today's the 28th. That means we got 26 days. The biggest thing you can do is talk to everybody you know. Because look, you've come to a number, I recognize you've come to a number of these, right? So you can speak as somewhat of an expert to people. Because as you know, most people don't come to these things, right? And so, but maybe they want to vote. Or maybe they think they might want to vote, but they're not really sure and they haven't focused in. And they've got other challenges and things in their lives that don't make this the center of their existence, even here in New Hampshire, the presidential wine tasters of America, right? I mean, what I need people in this room to do is to ignore the noise and decide who you think should be president. And then go out and tell everybody you know what you think. And urge them to make a choice. You can urge them to make the choice you're making, but in the end, urge them to make any choice. Show up and vote. Because look, New Hampshire is it. If Donald Trump's going to win Iowa, and if Donald Trump wins Iowa and New Hampshire, it's over, guys. Okay? And I totally agree with you. That's why my rear end is here from New Jersey doing this, okay? Because I agree with you. But look, the most important thing everybody in this room can do who believes that I'm the right person for the job is to get as many people as you can to pay attention and to show up. Because, I had a guy who I talked to today who said to me, well, how do you explain the polls? And I'm like, I don't know. If the polls were always right, Hillary Clinton would be in her second term. I mean, the polls aren't always right. And the polls change drastically, quickly. And I don't know what the polls looked like a week ago. After the last couple of days, I don't know if they're still going to look the same way. And so I've been around this long enough to know that in the end, you decide. And I got to be willing to put my fate in your hands. And I got to keep doing everything I'm doing to try to give you all the ammunition you need and the inspiration you need. But in the end, it's not about money at this point. It's not about anything other than in a place like New Hampshire where 300,000 people maybe will vote. You're going to decide who the Republican nominee is for president. 300,000 people in this state are probably going to decide who the Republican nominee for president is. The only thing I can ask you to do is stop worrying about, I've said this to a number of the really rich donors, you call them to ask them for money. It's one of the most disgusting parts of the job. And they say to you, well, tell me exactly the path of how you're going to win before I write you a check. And I'm like, well, hell, man, if I knew that, I don't need you, right? I mean, the fact is, and I've said this to any number of them, same thing I'm saying to you, figure out who you want to be president and then work as hard as you can to make it true. And this is one of the only countries in the world where you can do that. And this is the state where you can do it. Iowa has a caucus. It's a closed system. It's independents like you can't participate broadly in that caucus. It's done in a way that makes it long and difficult. You don't have to show up at a voting booth and vote. You got to go and sit in a classroom and caucus and go to one room and another room. And it's a big involved process. God bless them. They like it. Good for them. They should be able to make that choice. But here, you guys have an opportunity that no one else in the country has. My state, our primary is June 5th. Forget it. It's going to be over by then, man. And so, you guys have a chance to do something that no one else has a chance to do. So I appreciate you asking, and I appreciate you offering your help. And I really think that's the only thing left to do. All I can do is try to recruit as many of you as I possibly can, and then hope that I can inspire you to go and recruit more people. And then Things happen on election day. Remember something, at this stage in 2008, John McCain was in 4th place in the state. 4th place. And so, like, I'm one spot better than him at the moment. So I'm ahead of McCain at this point, right? I mean, we have work to do in the next 26 days, but I'm not going to let anybody make that decision for you. And that's the best thing you can do to help, and I appreciate your offering. Thanks. All right. Look, I've been looking at the guy with the Reagan Bush shirt on all night, so this may be a bit of a tempt, but I'm going to go with him anyway. He's now going to start to read his question from the phone, so this should be interesting. Let's go.
Good evening, Governor Christie.
Good evening.
My name's Michael. I'm from Massachusetts. I traveled 2 hours to be here tonight.
Thank you for coming, Michael.
I'm a senior in high school. So, on the topic of same-sex marriage, you claim that generational change in opinion will forge how you lead. So, as younger generations having increasingly become supportive of gay marriage, you will support LGBTQ policies. How would you address the issue of abortion, in which my generation is becoming increasingly pro-choice, even while abortion undeniably takes the life of an innocent unborn child? Will you change your opinion in policymaking, even if it is morally wrong, and support taking the lives of unborn children just because public opinion is shifting? Or will you stand with the most vulnerable people in society, which is the unborn?
Well, I'm pro-life, and I've governed as a pro-life governor when I was in New Jersey, even though my state was predominantly pro-choice. But I think since the Dobbs decision was made and Roe was taken off the books, and it did what I think should have been done for a long time, which is to return this issue to the states. And I think the people of every state should vote on this issue, and they should decide. I don't think the federal government should have any role in this at all. I don't think we should have one national standard for this. I think the people of New Hampshire should be able to vote and decide on how they think this should go. And the people of Iowa and the people of New Jersey. And look, in New Jersey, it's 9 months. You get an abortion up to 9 months. I don't agree with that. Okay, but my job in New Jersey, if I want to do that, is to work there to try to change that. If it happened in Washington, D.C., and it's set for the whole country, I'm going to have no chance to try to change that. In my own state, I could. And that's why I think you're going to have diversion across the country. Oklahoma, no abortion at all, except if the life of the mother is threatened. I don't agree with that either, because I've always agreed with exceptions for rape and for incest, and I don't. So I wouldn't agree with Oklahoma either. But I think if everybody in each state gets to decide for themselves, vote and decide what the rules are in their state, that's the best way to go. And I think that's the way the founders intended it to be. I'd continue to advocate for life because that's what I believe. But as president, I'm telling you right now, I would not sign any national ban on abortion of any length, because I don't think it should be a national issue, because that can change. Congress changes, it could go back the other way. And the whole country would be a seesaw going back and forth. I think each state should make their own call on this. It's a serious issue, it's an emotional issue, it's a personal issue. And if it's that serious and emotional and personal, then the individual citizens of every state should be able to make that judgment for themselves. And let me end with this. This is another place where me, Nikki, and Ron disagree. Okay, Ron signed a 6-week abortion ban in Florida as governor, and he says he would do the same thing if he were president. When Nikki's in Iowa, she says she'll sign a 6-week abortion ban. When she's in New Hampshire, she says she wants to be compassionate and have everybody make the decision for themselves. And when we had the Texas abortion case recently where the woman was carrying a child with a fatal disease that would either be stillborn or die days after birth, so there was no hope to save the life. In that instance, the Texas Supreme Court said she can't have an abortion. I disagree with that. The goal of a pro-life policy is to save a life. If that life is unsavable, and all we're doing is putting the mother's life at risk and making the mother, in this instance, have to carry that pregnancy for another 20 weeks, knowing it was going to end in death, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I spoke out against that. Nikki and Ron would not. And so some of this is about what laws you would establish or not establish. And I've been really clear on that. As president, I would not sign any national ban. But I will also tell you, on a personal level, I'll continue to advocate for life because it's what I believe. And I don't think that's one of those things that can change based upon if your generation is more pro-choice. With respect to you and to you, life is an essential issue. Relationships are important, but they're not in the first line of the Constitution. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the Declaration of Independence, and in the Constitution talking about protecting life. And so I believe that. I'll continue to advocate for it, but I'm not going to impose at the federal government level a national rule on this. I want each state and their citizens to make their own decision. I'm different than Nikki and Ron on this, and I think that's an important thing for people in New Hampshire to know, because if that's what they're going to do and how they're going to govern, then those decisions are going to be back to being made in Washington, D.C., and instead of by the Supreme Court, by Congress and the president. And if you've watched this Congress operate, 3 weeks to pick a speaker, and they held up 400 military promotions for politics surrounding this issue, I don't want them deciding the most intimate, personal, emotional things that people decide. I trust the people to vote over the politicians voting in Washington, and that's the way I'd handle it as president.
Thank you for coming, Governor Christie. I'm actually also a senior in high school, so this will be my first election voting. And so I have a question. This is a topic that I've had to research for many debate tournaments, but it's about specifically high-speed rail. I have looked into your kind of views on the subject, and I haven't really found anything clear on it, but high-speed rail is something that has worked. I've seen firsthand in places like Europe. High-speed rail has worked really well there. I haven't been to places like Japan or China, but it's worked there as well from everything that I've looked into. And so I guess with that, what is your official policy on increasing investment in high-speed rail or rail in general, not necessarily just high-speed rail?
I would be for it in highly congested parts of the country. So like the Boston to Washington corridor, yeah, I would be for improving that route, making it more high-speed and more available. And in fact, I worked really hard when I was governor of New Jersey to get the project that's now finally gotten funded and getting done, which is the Gateway Tunnel between New York and New Jersey, which will help to make that trip from Boston to Washington much faster and much easier by adding tunnels under the Hudson River and being able to do it the right way so it goes into Penn Station in New York, and people can make their switches there and go to other trains that are much more available there than they would be other places. And in other parts of the country that are heavily congested, meaning your traffic is crazy. Like I think there should be high-speed rail in the entire state of Connecticut. Just like, because I can never drive in Connecticut, it drives me crazy. And so in those areas I would, because, and a little of a history lesson, because Eisenhower made the judgment when he became president. He had a choice. He had two projects in front of him. High-speed rail all across the country, kind of like Europe has, or an interstate highway system. And Eisenhower picked an interstate highway system because he was a military guy, and he looked at it saying, if we ever have to defend this country from an invasion, I want all these highways and be able to move all the equipment and everything else around that way. So that's the way he went. So we made this enormous investment in an interstate highway system all over this country, and which I think has generally been a good thing. But in areas like Southern California, like Chicago, like the Boston to Washington corridor, you have enormous traffic now that has developed because of the population growth, and having rail that's convenient and available would help to ease that traffic problem, which affects everybody's quality of life in a bunch of ways, not just in terms of getting from one place to another, but also in terms of pollution and all the rest of the things that we have to deal with that. So that's where I'd be on it. So I wouldn't be for universal high-speed rail, but I would be for high-speed rail in particularly congested areas of the country. All right, I could do two more questions. Let's go to the Red Sox fan. Why not? We're equally tortured. You're a Red Sox fan, I'm a Mets fan. In fact, I would argue I'm more tortured than you are now because you've won a few World Series. I haven't won one since that one in 1986, which you and I won't talk about.
I have a confession. I don't have a question for you. I'd just like to say thank you for being honest with us tonight and treating us like adults. And I've really missed that lately. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. All right. That wasn't really a question, so I'll still take two more.
I have a question here. How the heck did you harness this wonderful woman
Well, well, okay, but I'll only count it. See, these are the plants that we have at our town halls. My wife plants them to ask questions about how wonderful she is. Well, look, it's pretty simple. I got her when she was young and she didn't know any better. Mary Pat and I met in college at the University of Delaware. Yes, fighting blue hens, baby. And we met in college at the University of Delaware. We got married when I was in law school. I was 23, she was 22. We look at our own children now and think, oh my God, we couldn't possibly imagine it. And we grew up together. And I think, what was my move? She may have to answer this one. So I didn't have any more moves then than I have now, pal. That's the bottom line. So you want to know the move? All right, but this is the last question now on this, all right? I'll give you the move. So we knew each other for 3 years. And during that 3-year period, we were dating other people. But we were always friends. We knew each other. And she went away we had a winter session at the University of Delaware, like a 5-week middle semester. And she went off to Europe for 5 weeks. And she came back, and I was in this bar called the Deer Park Tavern in Newark, Delaware. And I was sitting with a group of my friends, and there was a band there that night, and there were a bunch of people dancing on the dance floor. And I saw this girl who had her back to me, and she was dancing, and I thought, she's kind of cute, right? I wonder who she is. Because the woman who had left 5 weeks earlier had hair down to here. And this woman who I was looking at the back of had hair down to here. So I didn't put the two together. She turned around, and it was her. And I all of a sudden looked at her a lot differently than I looked at her before. It was that moment. And so what did I do? I invited her. We sat down at the table with a group of friends. She knew the people. We had a couple of drinks together, and I offered to walk her home. So I walked her back to her apartment, and that was it. And it started from there. So that was the move. I just was a gentleman. I was attracted to her. I knew her. I walked her back to her apartment. I didn't make any moves that night. And then asked her to go out. After that, she said yes. And that was February of 1984. So this February, I didn't think about this till now, but this February, it'll be 40 years since our first date. And we've been together ever since. And as far as keeping her, she has enormous patience. That's all I can tell you. She's a woman of enormous patience. Okay, last question. Let's go to this guy right here.
Governor, there's climate, military problems all over the world. What's your view of American leadership and how we're going to address that?
Well, we're certainly not going to address it by just saying America first. If I took a poll in this room and I asked you, do you think America should be first? I suspect that everybody in this room would raise their hand, right? Is there anybody who thinks America should be third? Like comfortably behind like Belgium and Luxembourg, right? Everybody thinks America should be first. The question is, how's America become first? And my view, if you look at our history, is the way America has always become first is that we don't fill the moat and pull up the drawbridge, but we make friends all over the world. And we have created friendships and alliances all over the world that has made us stronger economically, stronger militarily, stronger diplomatically. And the problem with the Trump, DeSantis, Ramaswamy approach to America first is they mean America alone. And America alone is going to lead to all the problems that we see around the world right now. Because when America's not on watch, the evil people make mischief. So Putin was given every indication by Obama, who let him go into Crimea, by Trump, who kissed his rear end every chance he could and said how great he was, and by Biden, who when he got in said a little incursion into Ukraine wouldn't be so bad. Well, Putin took that as a sign. America's backing off. Great. I go into Ukraine. Now we have this problem in Ukraine. That's a world problem. In Israel, we had a situation where these last few presidents have not done what they needed to do to show that America will stand up for Israel no matter what. And then Russia looks over at Iran, who funds Hamas, and says, hey, America's playing too much role here in Ukraine. Can you go and start something over there to distract them? And I absolutely believe that that's what happened. And so we've got a situation in the world now that will only get worse. President Xi said this week, we will reunify with Taiwan. We better take him seriously. And remember something, 2/3 of the world's semiconductors are made in Taiwan. Everything we do in our life now is run by a semiconductor. You want China in control of that? So look, I had a woman ask me 8 years ago at a town hall meeting, why should America be involved in helping all these people around the world? And I said to her, I could give you a really long, complex answer, but I'll give you the short one. It's the price we pay for being the richest, freest country the world's ever known. And if we want to continue to be the richest and freest country in the world, we got to make sure that we don't allow this mischief to happen all over the world. And that our friends know when we give them a word, we're going to stand up for it. And so the kind of president I would be is I'm not going to be looking for wars, but I'm going to make sure they all understand that if you decide to take aggressive actions against one of our friends, we're going to be standing with our friends. And that's not only going to help us militarily and from a diplomatic perspective, but it's going to help us economically too. And I love this conversation about Ukraine. They don't want to spend any more money on Ukraine. Do you know that 95% of the aid we're giving to Ukraine is spent in the United States? Because all we're giving them for the most part, 5% of the overall 40 plus billion has been spent in Ukraine. 95% has been spent here to build weapons to send them, or to send them weapons and then for us to refill our stockpiles. So this idea that somehow we're giving away this money to Ukraine, I love Ramaswamy, what a knucklehead. I mean, really, gets on his horse and says, we're spending all this money on Ukraine's border, but nothing on America's border. And that's why we can't spend on America's border because we're spending on Ukraine's border. No. All the money we're spending on Ukraine is being spent here. Now, that's not a reason to do it, but it's some truth about what really happens when we give this kind of aid. Most of the time, it helps our economy as much as it helps their national security. And so that's the kind of president I would be. And on climate, look, we've got to be honest about it. Climate change is real. Human activity contributes to it. And guess what? We've done a lot of good over the last 10 years. We've reduced our carbon output in this country by 1 billion tons of carbon a year, every year for the last 10 years. Here's the problem. China's increased their carbon output 5 billion tons a year, every year for the last 10 years. They're burning coal over there like it's going out of style. And where America has to play a role on climate is to make that one of our agenda items with China. They say, you've had your industrial revolution, okay? You're not the farmers anymore in China, like you were when Mao ran the revolution. You are now the second largest economy in the world. And you need to start acting like a responsible world player. And if you don't, then we're going to take actions against you to make your economy weaker. Because you need America more than we need you. That's the truth. If we stopped doing things with China from a trade perspective, an already troubled economy in China would really be in trouble. And guess what? That's the only reason President Xi came to San Francisco a month ago. It wasn't to see the Golden Gate Bridge. Okay, he came over here because American companies were going to be there, and he wanted to continue to urge them to do business in China. So we have leverage now, and we should use it, and I would use it as president. And remember something about Trump, who said he made the greatest trade deal ever. The greatest trade deal ever with China, right? 40% of what they've promised to buy in agricultural goods, they've bought. It's even less than that on the other deals that he made that they've kept up with. It's all baloney. And you need a president who's, again, see, he couldn't come and say to the American people, I thought this deal was really good, but it turns out they're not agreeing to the deal, so now I have to take other steps. Because that would be admitting that he failed at something. And of course, he's never failed at anything, except that he's gone bankrupt 3 times in my state. I mean, think about this guy, right? This great businessman. His casinos in New Jersey went bankrupt 3 times. how the hell do you go bankrupt at a casino? Does anybody ever win? I read very few people ever go into a casino and walk out with more money than they walked in with, right? And remember back then when he went bankrupt, it was a monopoly. There was casino gambling in 2 places, Nevada and Atlantic City, New Jersey, and that was it. When he had a monopoly, he went bankrupt 3 times. This guy is a lousy businessman. Lousy. And he ran the country the same way. So we need a president who knows what his strengths are and what his weaknesses are, who's willing to engage with the rest of the world, who's willing to stand up for our friends and make it stick, and who will admit when he's made a mistake. Let me guarantee you something. I am not perfect, and I will make mistakes if you elect me president. I guarantee you, because I'm human, and I'll make mistakes. But here's the difference between me and Trump. When I make them, I'll admit them. When he makes them, he blames it on everybody else. And so, what kind of president do we want? If we're looking for the perfect president, get up and leave. Because he ain't here. And you could go scour all around the rest of New Hampshire, you're not going to find that person either. What I suggest you should want is someone who understands America's role in the world, understands that we are the indispensable nation, and doesn't shy away from it. Because the day we begin to believe we're not the indispensable nation, we will no longer be the freest, richest, or bravest either. And I don't want to be around. I'm not going to be part of the generation that gives that away. Got a guy there who fought for it, a guy there who fought for it. We got a bunch of people in this room who I'm sure fought for it. And I'm not going to be part of the generation who gives away what they fought for. And that's cowardice. And that's what he is. Don't ever forget this. Trump is a coward. All that bluster, all the baloney, all the yelling and screaming and the name calling, that's what cowards do. And guess who else is a coward? The people who won't stand up to him and say it. Yes. Okay? So we need to have some strength in this country. So that's the way I would deal with it. All right. I'm going to end with this. I'm going to end where I started. Remember why I got into this race. I got into this race to tell the truth. And I hope that you believe after being here for a couple hours tonight that that's what you've heard. And if you believe that, then I need you to not only vote for me, but I need you to work for me in the next 26 days. I am not giving up. I'm not giving in. I am on a mission to try to restore the soul of our party and the soul of our country. And I am not willing to go down without a fight. And I'm certainly not willing to give in to somebody like Donald Trump, who puts his interest before yours. And I'm not going to give in to anybody else either who hasn't earned it by telling the truth themselves, standing up themselves, and not blaming it on Democratic plants. And being scared to say what the truth is about anything. Something as simple as the origins of the Civil War, or something as important and complicated as America's role in the world, or something as absolutely fundamental as the character of Donald Trump. You can agree with his policies. I agreed with some of his policies. But no thinking, breathing human being in this country can objectively look at his actions and say this is a man of character. He's not. He's not a man of character. And if we don't start, first and foremost, by electing someone who is someone of character, nothing else they promise us will matter. Because their promises will mean nothing. Because they don't have the character to know you have to stand behind your promises. You will not always agree with me. Some days you will listen to me and say, keep quiet, I'm turning my TV off, I don't want to hear anymore. But there will never be a day that I'm your president where you won't know I'm telling you what I really believe in my heart and what I know the truth to be. And I think that that's the kind of president we need now more than any time in our country's history. I'm willing to be that president. If you give me your support, I will be. So thanks for coming tonight. I appreciate it.